and faithfully serve in their several offices through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. The kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all now and forevermore. Amen.
The Senate is in session.
Messages from Her Excellency the President. Announcements by Your Honor.
Minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, 12th November 2025 for deferral. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I'd like to move that the minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, the 12th of November 2025 are deferred at this time.
The question is that the minutes of our meeting of Wednesday, 12th November 2025 be deferred. Do those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. I have a letter from Senator the Honorable Wade Mark, President of the Senate of Trinidad and Tobago, dated November 17, 2025, and it reads as follows. Heading expression of appreciation for the hosting of the 68th Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference, October 5th to 12th, 2025, Bridgetown, Barbados. On behalf of the delegation of the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, I extend our sincere congratulations to the Parliament of Barbados on the successful hosting of the 68th Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference. The execution of the conference was managed with the highest level of professionalism, reflecting the efficiency and commitment of your Parliament's leadership. The seamless facilitation of the sessions and event's overall structure demonstrated exceptional attention to detail. We also wish to express our deep appreciation for the warmth and hospitality extended to our delegation. The professionalism and attentiveness of the protocol officers, conference coordinators, drivers, and all supporting personnel were commendable. Their efforts were instrumental in ensuring participants felt both comfortable and welcome throughout the event. A special thank you to the Honourable Arthur Holder MP, Speaker of the House of Assembly, and Mr. Pedro Eastman, Clerk of Parliament, for their contributions, along with those of others, in ensuring that the Caribbean, Americas, and Atlantic region of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association felt proud of the outstanding success of CPC 2025. Please convey our heartfelt gratitude and congratulations to all involved in ensuring that the 68th Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference was such an impeccably executed and memorable gathering. It was indeed a privilege for our delegation to be part of this distinguished conference. Sincerely, Senator the Honourable Wade Mark, President of the Senate of Trinidad and Tobago. There will be further announcements. I have excuses for absence from Senator Dr. Drakes and Her Honour Senator Thompson. And indications of late arrival from Senator Maynard.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I'd like to lay the following documents. The Duties, Taxes, and Other Payments Exemption Sanitation Service Authority Number 2, Order of 2025. The Duties, Taxes, and Other Payments Exemption, Atiba Oluko Order of 2025.
Reports from select committees. Questions to ministers. Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate and adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Beg your pardon. Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations. Motions relating to the business or sitting of the Senate and moved by a minister.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 45-2 and 22-1 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that Standing Orders 45-2 and 22-1 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The next the ayes have it. Those standing orders are accordingly suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
Introduction of bills.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the first reading of the following items. I beg to move that they be read a first time, to have the first reading of the Companies Economic Substance Repeal Bill of 2025, to move the first reading of the Income Tax Amendment Bill of 2025, the first reading of the Final Appropriation 2022-2023 Bill 2025, the first reading of the Final Appropriation 2023-2024 Bill 2025, and finally the first reading of the Final Appropriation Bill 2024-2025.
The question is that those aforementioned bills be read a first time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The next the ayes have it. Those bills are accordingly read a first time.
Public business, sir.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Order number 10, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Companies Economic Substance Repeal Bill 2025.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg your permission to treat to orders number 10 and 11 as a cognate debate, given the two are inextricably linked.
Honourable senators, the proposal is to treat these matters as a cognate debate. This is order number 10, Companies Economic Substance Bill, and number 11, amendments to the Income Tax Bill. As I understand it, to move the matters which are currently in the Companies Economic Substance Act into the Income Tax Act. Therefore, the proposals that we treat them as a cognate debate, of course, they will be voted on individually. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The next the ayes have it. We will therefore treat these as a cognate debate. Ensure, Senator Cummings, that you speak to both matters in your introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The two bills that are before the Honourable Senate this morning, as I've said in my request to treat to them as a cognate debate, relate to, in the first instance, the Companies Economic Substance Act, which is to be repealed, and the provisions that are being repealed from the 2019 legislation for economic substance will then, where applicable, be incorporated into the Income Tax Act, Cap 73. In the first instance, Mr. President, the Economic Substance Act, the Companies Economic Substance Act, fell under the administration of the International Business Unit, the government's Ministry of Energy and Business, Business Unit, and the Income Tax Act falls under the Barbados Revenue Authority. By repealing the Economic Substance Act specific to companies and placing it under the Income Tax Act, under the purview of the Barbados Revenue Authority, we now create a level of synergy whereby a single regime is being managed by a single agency, rather than having parallel overlapping regimes governed by two separate entities. In the first instance, Mr. President, the Economic Substance Repeal Bill at order number 10, it's a very short bill as it stands now. There are 4 sections that are covered here, and the substantial one that I would want to draw attention to would be Section 3, speaking to the transitional arrangements, which effectively allow for the retention of the compliance requirements under the existing ministry with responsibility for business. And so the rights, powers, privileges, and functions relating to the administration and enforcement of the former act shall continue to be exercisable, that the obligations in the same way for the former act and subsisting immediately before the commencement of this act shall continue to subsist, and that remedies under the former act shall continue to be available, and that the proceedings that were already commenced under the former act shall be continued. And so it also makes reference to the time period where we speak to the 31st day of December 2024, where the former act is now being repealed, and to provide for the entry into force of the new provisions once this repeal has been completed into the Income Tax Act effective January 1, 2025. And you know if I say 2025. And in the Income Tax Act, you now have, again, a short section, and the insertion of the new division into the cap is covered at sections 52A, 52B, 52.3, 52C, and D, Mr. President, that then allow all the way through to F for the provisions, which I will go through in some detail as I cover what economic substance refers to, why Barbados in 2019 came to this honorable chamber, as we recall, to be able to put an economic substance regime in place, and why we're now repealing it, and what has happened globally, specifically with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, with the Forum on Harmful Tax Practices, the FHTP, the AML regime, anti-money laundering regime, and how these things now fall under the remit in different ways of the Barbados Revenue Authority as it relates to the collection of corporation taxes and the relevant submissions by companies under the companies legislation, now under the Income Tax Administration, and where the compliance requirements remain under the government's separate body, under the Ministry with Responsibility for Energy and Business, which I have the privilege of leading. So, Mr. President, for those of us who would recall, in January of 2024, Barbados undertook sweeping changes to our taxation regime. Barbados decided at the time, on advice from our international and local advisory team, that given the emergence of the global regime for the convergence of a minimum tax, that Barbados wanted to make sure that we were in a new space. I think all of us would remember the days when Barbados was being blacklisted, when we were being gray-listed, and when we were having any number of issues with our offshore regime, which then transitioned to our international business regime, which has now transitioned into our business regime. All business is local business because all businesses are now registered under the Companies Act. And so, Mr. President, this legislation originally passed in January of 2019, in December 2019, was really meant to correlate to what existed at the time. Now, what you will have, and I will go through them in some detail, 3 instances where the regime that we are repealing will still exist, and the reasons why: shipping, insurance, intellectual property, specifically the patent box. And when the corporation tax reforms took place last January, these were the areas that were also flagged. And so this now would remain as part of the preferential regimes, and I'll tell you the reasons why in a few moments. This, Mr. President, you remember there was a discussion globally and locally around whether Barbados was a no-tax or a low-tax jurisdiction, whether we were a tax haven or not a tax haven. And I've spent enough time covering this issue meeting with the OECD, traveling to the OECD, making the case on behalf of Barbados, and every other minister with responsibility for international business before me has had to do the same thing. Every other minister of finance has had to do the same thing. And more recently, the minister with responsibility for judicial affairs, the Attorney General, has had to do the same thing specifically as it relates to our anti-money laundering regime, specifically Forum on Harmful Taxation. And you, Mr. President, wearing a different hat, have been very critical in that process. So in 2024 January, we know that Barbados took the decision to go into a harmonized global minimum tax regime. We introduced the minimum tax of 9%, and that became the standard for companies that fell within scope. And by within scope, I'm speaking specifically of companies that earned over 750 million, with an M, $750 million euros, not 750 million euros per year. That's what is constituted as in scope. So let it be clear, these measures have not been applicable to small businesses in this country. There is no equivalence between this regime and the small business regime. When we started to make the harmonization arrangements, we were basing it on the OECD global standards, What was found globally was that there were a number of companies that were engaging in profit shifting, and companies that were most likely to engage in profit shifting were shifting them to other jurisdictions where taxation levels were lower, and they were not necessarily paying what was considered to be, by some member states, their fair share of taxes. What they found was that the preferential regime created tax arbitrage opportunities, undermined the fairness and integrity of tax systems, and then raised the concerns of base erosion and profit shifting BEPS, which is what I referred to earlier. So the OECD Forum on Harmful Tax Practices, I do not know what's happening to my throat, my voice today. Thank you. Made the decision to dismantle what we used to call ring-fence businesses. We no longer refer to ring-fencing in the international business space globally. That's no longer something that is done. Barbados does not do that. We ensured instead that we had what we called real substance. And what do I mean by real substance? There are some jurisdictions across the region and beyond that have shell companies. You set up a company, but it doesn't carry on any actual business in the jurisdiction. And so Barbados' economic substance regime was specifically to make sure that there was some element of domestic activity for all companies that set up here. One of the things that we also sought to do, Mr. President, was to eliminate incentives that led to the profit shifting that we were speaking about. And so once the OECD attempted to introduce these measures for a global minimum tax to mitigate against these things, Barbados moved in that direction. And so we moved into the category, into the category of having a 9% tax rate, which we know, and then we were required to implement a formal economic substance regime to avoid being labeled as non-cooperative. Now, Mr. President, as you know, despite the number of laws that we have implemented, despite the number of regimes that we have introduced, we still, by some jurisdictions, are deemed as non-cooperative just by virtue of our tax rate. The fact that the tax rate was varying between a cap 5.5% for small businesses, not in this scope here, and 1%, 2% in other instances, we were deemed by some jurisdictions as non-cooperative. Barbados has attempted to address many of those things. So where are we now? What are we doing now? The major reforms that were adopted in 2024 effectively transformed the tax landscape. It accomplished a couple of things. One, the tax rate that I just spoke about. It aligned with the OECD thresholds and removed those concerns about Barbados being a no or a nominal tax jurisdiction. It put Barbados squarely into the international domain of having a minimum 15% effective tax rate, limiting profit shifting, which I mentioned earlier, and making Barbados' regime more robust and more internationally credible. Barbados also signed the multilateral agreement with the OECD that has the competent authority as the Barbados Revenue Authority, thereby connecting the Barbados Revenue Authority and this Income Tax Act to the repeal of the regime. And so having signed the multilateral cooperation agreement with the OECD, the BRA is obligated to now submit annual reports on that basis. Once we did that, Mr. President, Barbados's risk profile dropped significantly. We were no longer considered in the range that would then lead to the blacklisting and the gray listing and all those different colors that we had. Most companies then faced standard non-preferential tax treatment, and economic substance requirements were no longer necessary across the board. This allowed for Barbados to enter into the new space. Only three sectors now will continue to benefit from the preferential rate, thereby triggering the enhanced compliance requirements. It is not that they have lower compliance requirements, they actually have higher compliance requirements. And those three sectors I spoke about earlier: shipping, insurance, and the IP patent box. What that means is that you now have the obligation to submit additional documentation to prove compliance to the Barbados Revenue Authority, well, actually to the Ministry with Responsibility for Business, the IBU, who in turn shares that information with the Barbados Revenue Authority. Effectively, by consolidating all of the obligations on the companies under the Income Tax Act, as we have done, we now do a couple of things. We simplify the filing of annual returns under the corporation tax regime. It reduces the duplication between the Ministry with Responsibility for Business and the Barbados Revenue Authority. You now are interfacing with the government of Barbados as if we are one government. Not one agency you have to submit to plus another one submission to the BRA. Best practices have been found in other jurisdictions like Guernsey and Jersey, and we've used those models to be able to develop this process. The FHTP had to be consulted. We never take any of these actions as a ministry or as a government without engaging with the global partners. And so the ministry took responsibility for engaging with the Forum on Harmful Tax Practices and with the OECD Global Forum, and we shared the legislative reforms and the provisions that currently exist with them and got their feedback before we came to Cabinet and before we came to Parliament. And so what you have before you here has come with the agreement and with the blessing of the international agencies. And so on that basis, they have agreed to a couple of things with Barbados. The repeal is to be effective, which is why I said earlier that I deliberately said 2025 January. The repeal will be effective January 1, 2025. Secondly, for previous periods, up to and ending December 31st, 2024, companies that fall within those time periods would have to be compliant with the rules as they existed before. So you would have the period up to 2024, December. All the companies that fall within the regime would have to meet the requirements. The Director of International Business, therefore, the compliance part of it that I said I made reference to in the economic substance section of the income tax legislation, the Director of International Business would retain the powers for audit and enforce the compliance for those periods up to December 2024. The old guidelines would therefore remain valid for those periods up to December 2024. But for fiscal periods going forward from 2025 onward, substance declarations will be filed along with the corporation tax return. If they have to submit documentation, as I have shared, they will be doing so this time from 2025 onward, not to the IBU, but to the Barbados Revenue Authority. Now, what are the strategic implications for Barbados? There are a few. One, it allows us to ensure alignment with the OECD standards and with the EU. Let me take a moment just to qualify. The OECD does not blacklist. We hear that a lot of times. The OECD, for Barbados's purposes, is not a blacklist. The OECD would review under the Forum for Harmful Tax Practices, under the Global Forum, under the Inclusive Forum, and they will make recommendations. Those recommendations go, in the case of the EU, to the EU Code of Conduct. The EU Code of Conduct Committee will then take a position on the basis of the recommendations from the OECD in its various arms. And then the EU will take a determination to agree with or to send back a different position based on what the OECD submits. In some instances, we have seen that while the OECD has made a recommendation that Barbados is compliant and is not to be classified as a non-cooperative jurisdiction, the EU has taken a similar position on recommendation from the OECD. Individual member states have, however, taken the position that their only consideration is that Barbados has a lower tax rate than they do, and so they have maintained Barbados on a blacklist. That is why the global minimum tax was important for Barbados as well. What it does also, Mr. President, is it enforces Barbados's ability to have greater access to global capital markets. By credibility enhancements, Mr. President, you're able to see investors seeing a level of transparency and visibility to the market. Ordinary companies that fall within scope no longer have to face the backlog of unnecessary filings. It removes that from companies. Administrative efficiency, which I've already spoken about, the BRA then takes responsibility for that. And we expect that there are going to be some issues as we go through the transitional phase. And I want to give the assurance that the International Business Unit, and specifically the Director of International Business Unit and her team, will be there and on hand to work with the CTSBs, the corporate trust service providers, to make certain that any queries that they may have during the period are being answered. So what would I want to say to Barbadians as I say all of this fancy schmancy stuff, OECD, FHTP, Global Poor, Global Forum, International Business Unit, QMDTT, what are all of these things, Mr. President? Here are the main messages that I want to share with you. Most companies in this country will not be affected by economic substance rules. It does not apply. One of the most important messages is just that. The majority of companies in Barbados are not captured by these rules simply because of the amount of annual turnover or annual revenue. Only 3 specific sectors, shipping, insurance, and intellectual property patent box, remain subject to economic substance requirements. For ordinary businesses, including SMEs, manufacturers, retail companies, professional service firms, and domestic enterprises, there is no longer an economic substance requirement. That has been removed, and this reduces the administrative burden. Message number 2, Mr. President, this has nothing to do with taxes for regular businesses. Nothing at all to do. This is not the introduction of a new tax for any companies. Businesses continue paying the standard 9% corporate tax rate, especially when you fall within scope. The other part of it that I would say, Mr. President, the other key message is that the new rules are really designed to protect Barbados in the international system. What I really want Barbadians to understand is that in order for a bank to lend an individual money, they have to have a credit rating. You may go to CARICRIS, or you may go to one of the agencies and they're going to do a credit report on you, make sure that you have your finances in order, you have a history of paying back your debts, you're servicing your loans, you're servicing your obligations, you are not facing bankruptcy proceedings if you want to apply for new credit. Those are things that typically in our own lives, we understand are part and parcel of day-to-day life. The same thing applies to a country, Mr. President. Barbados has to have a certain level of credibility in order to attract investment. And credibility has come as a consequence, Mr. President, of us introducing in the first instance predictability in the corporation tax regime, the implementation of a series of business rules that we have seen, particularly under the international business sector, as it was then called, and under the Barbados Revenue Authority, but also making reforms as time evolves to make sure that we are keeping pace with the evolution of what's happening globally. So these reforms that we have come over time to this place, to this chamber, and to the other place to make are really about making sure that Barbados has that international credibility. If we have the blacklisting, in some instances, as has happened in the very recent past, Mr. President, if Barbados was to go from a gray list to a blacklist, there are some companies that would have to move domicile from the country. There are some companies that would no longer be allowed to function in Barbados, and so we have had to make certain that that did not happen. So we have taken every possible action to ensure that Barbados does not find itself in that space. And the message to the international community has been clear. Barbados remains open for global business, and the country wants to make sure that we are reforming to keep pace with what the global community is saying to us. Now, I want to make one or a few points on the sector more broadly, Mr. President. There are a number of additional reforms that are not captured in the legislation, but speak to the overall international business sector. So while we repeal the economic substance provisions, we have the provisions for the sectors that I have mentioned. We bring the regime under the Income Tax Act. There are also additional things that need to be done, and I want to also thank the Barbados International Business Association and the various sector associations with whom, and I say this every time I come here with a bill that's one of my own, we have taken the time to consult with them as well. Once we were proposing to make the repeal amendments and the changes to the income tax legislation, we met with, shared the drafts of the legislation, engaged with them. I myself also spoke at the launch of Global Business Week to the sector to make sure that everyone knew what was being proposed. Everyone welcomed at the time the changes that were being made because they're in the sector and they understood the sector. And so here we are now, having consulted with globally the OECD, locally with the international business community, the global business community, and now we are here with these changes. But there are some additional changes, Mr. President, that we also have indicated that we will and need to make. In 2022, Mr. President, the Cabinet agreed to the creation and the introduction of a beneficial ownership register. As I speak, the team from the International Business Unit has just returned alongside with the team from Business Barbados, formerly KIPO, from a site visit to KIPO, which has one of the best, not KIPO, best to Cayman Islands, one of the best and well-structured beneficial ownership registers. They have just returned, and we are engaging in an exercise to ensure that Barbados can introduce a beneficial ownership register. So that will be a change that we see coming up the way. We've also been engaging with the OECD, Mr. President. There are a number of instances where over the last several years, before this government came into office and since this government came into office, where through the review mechanism, Barbados has been judged to be largely compliant, partially compliant, or compliant in a number of areas. It has been our ambition to ensure that Barbados is compliant. And so we set out a roadmap a year and a half ago where we looked at all of the areas where Barbados was partially compliant. We then looked at the areas where we were largely compliant, and we set a roadmap in place on 3 parallel tracks, including a legislative track. This is one of the pieces of legislation that we set in motion coming out of that, Mr. President. A technology track, Mr. President, and a human resource and a skills-related track to allow for Barbados to move from being partially compliant in the areas that we were to largely compliant, and in the areas that we were largely compliant to move to compliant, so that Barbados will be fully compliant and remain compliant with the skills, the resources, and the technology in place for every portion of the overall regime, and that where reforms were necessary, that we would pivot and make those reforms in a timely manner. And so we have the economic substance regime being repealed, the income tax provisions being changed. The Barbados Revenue Authority has done a commendable job in expanding its capacity. They now have an international relations unit where they, together with the international business unit, travel to all of the OECD meetings, all the global forum meetings, and make sure that there's that synergy at the government level on all matters relating to global business and the global tax regime and the global tax reform structures that need to evolve. And equally so, Mr. President, we also have been working to ensure that we can create that predictable environment for investors. That, Mr. President, is the summary of what is before us in these 2 pieces of legislation, Mr. President, and I want to take the opportunity also to say that we simultaneously have been negotiating a series of double taxation agreements. We have completed negotiations in the last year with Hong Kong in the first round, and with Curacao also in one round of negotiations. We have started and we will go into second round negotiations with other jurisdictions. We have reconstituted Barbados's treaty negotiating team, and these things are all part and parcel of what Barbados negotiates when we go onto the international stage. And so the treaty negotiating team, Mr. President, has been expanded. It is still led by my team in the Global Business Unit, but it has been expanded to include the Barbados Growth Council. We, of course, have the representatives of the sector. The Barbados Revenue Authority is on that team. Invest Barbados is on that team. And we have a global strategy for the countries with whom we want to ensure Barbados, one, is engaging to come off a blacklist where they exist in individual states. And I'm pleased to share that for those countries where we have traditionally been blacklisted by having a nominal tax regime, now with us evolving into the global minimum tax regime, those countries have already indicated to us in our engagements that the expectation is that at the next review, we will have an opportunity to address the issues that they previously had, and we look forward to what changes may come down the line, and I don't want to presuppose what those changes will be, but we have begun the process of engagement. And I want to, as I close, Mr. President, because I don't want to make this into a broad speech on things that for many people are so far removed from their day-to-day lives that they don't necessarily feel as though they understand it. When we talk about numbers like $750 million, 750 million euros to be in scope, that is so far out of the average business in Barbados' wheelhouse that I don't want to create the opportunity for the waters to be muddied at all. These measures do not refer at all to the majority of businesses in this country. But they do allow that when the reporting period rolls around at the end of this year, that those companies to which it does apply, that they will have a change in their reporting requirements effective December 2025, and we are in a position to move forward into 2026 now on a clean slate, with Barbados having met and agreed with the OECD on what the new requirements have been that we have delivered, we have promised, and we have delivered. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. Senator Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, hopefully not. Thank you, Mr. President. And I rise to make a few comments on these two pieces of legislation because we recognize that they deal with a sector which was once, and probably still is, a very important sector to Barbados and the international business sector. And over the years, we have faced some challenges, not of our own making, but because of shifts in the financing in the world and more so the need for large world powers to bring back home some of the wealth which they thought had left their shores. Barbados has benefited from an international business sector which, one, employed a number of Barbadians, especially lawyers, accountants, and administrators. And that was just a direct involvement in the sector. But then there's also the secondary involvement in the sector where you have a number of persons owning properties here in Barbados because of their involvement in the international business sector, and their employees who worked with them having benefited. At one point in time, I believe that this sector brought in, and I think I have the figures here, in 2007, it was accounted for roughly $492 million in terms of revenue from the sector. When we look at this small amount, and this was basically coming from roughly 3,334 companies at that time. So it is when you look at the overall revenue of these companies, what we benefited from in Barbados probably in most cases did not even account to 0.1% of their overall revenue, because we were speaking about companies that made in excess of billions of dollars or when you combine the overall total, possibly trillions of dollars. And we were quite happy with our $492 million in 2007 because it did benefit Barbados. It did put revenue in our foreign reserves account. It did produce significant employment for a number of professionals, and it gave opportunities to young Barbadians who wanted to qualify in that area, lawyers and accountants, and opportunities to work in Barbados, but work for some of the largest companies in the world and be able to manage accounting portfolios of multi-million dollar accounting portfolios, an opportunity which they will probably never get from working with some of our locally based companies. So that's to show how important the sector has been and will continue to be for Barbados. But then over the years, you had the financial crisis from 2007, 8 and on, and you even had like one of our, countries such as Canada in particular, because a number of our international business companies at one point did come out of Canada, but they recognized the importance of bringing some of those taxes back home, started to put pressure on those companies and have some of them relocate from Barbados back into Canada so that they can benefit directly from the taxes, imposing the taxes. Now, once upon a time in debates such as these, the matter which Senator Cummings ended with, the double taxation agreements, that used to dominate the debates in these parliaments in terms of bringing information about the double taxation agreements which we signed with a number of countries, the role of the foreign minister at that time going to a number of different jurisdictions and starting the process. But that has not been sufficient for us to maintain or grab hold or dominance in the area because the double taxation agreements and the tiers were not sufficient. You needed more in terms of the regulation of the industry here in Barbados and more or less the transparency, because the issue then became, are you a tax haven? Are you involved in money laundering? All of those things, and being able to identify the beneficial owners of businesses, and also now with this particular piece of legislation, look at the amount of business which is actually conducted in the jurisdiction as opposed to it just being a shell company or a file in a drawer in the office of a lawyer with nothing more, no more activity happening within the jurisdiction. Mr. President, I say all of this because we really need to ask ourselves some serious questions. Because yes, we want the business, but is it fair the amount of hoops that we had to jump through and bend over backward in order to be able to attract the business in our jurisdictions? We do it because we need the opportunities, we need the revenue, we need the jobs for our people, and we do it as much as possible to be compliant. That has been the word for a number of years in terms of being compliant. But, Mr. President, ask ourselves the question, how much we all basically contribute to the coffers of a number of large international businesses, and because we have no choice. And to say that we would want to have some of these international businesses operating here in Barbados and providing an opportunity for employment or for the country to earn revenue, to say that that is beyond us because we are too small and that we are a small jurisdiction, I don't necessarily think that that is fair. If we go into every single wallet, every single one of us in here probably has a Visa card, but we don't, well, the lady shaking her head probably has an American Express card. But we all have either a Visa card, a MasterCard, right? But these are large international businesses, and we don't really make much of an impact on their decision-making, but we also contribute to the wealth which they generate. Every single one of us in here probably has an Amazon account. There we go, the lady shaking her head again. An Amazon account, or if not an Amazon account, we are using the Chinese version, which is Ali. I'm not Shenzhen and all of those different accounts. But at the end of the day, the point that I'm making, Mr. President, even though Senator Cummings shakes her head, and I don't believe her, I don't believe her in every single instance, the point that I'm making is that we don't have much of a choice here in Barbados where our 10 cents and our little coppers go. Because at the end of the day, they end up in the hands of a number of these large international business companies. And many of them do not have a presence here in Barbados or in the rest of the CARICOM territories because they figure that we're too small. With globalization, they took manufacturing basically away from us. Are they only saying that the only industry that we ought to rely on within the Caribbean is tourism? But we can't get too far with that because you can see with climate change, Mr. President, our ability to earn in tourism could be wiped out in just a matter of hours, as what would have happened with Melissa as it passed through Jamaica just a couple of weeks ago. So we try as small nations to expand our footprint and expand in the number of ways in which that we can earn revenue and provide jobs. At one point in time, our manufacturing sector, which is similar to the way how the international business sector was developed, because we offer concessionary space and taxation to large companies such as Intel when they're operated here so that we can be a part of that manufacturing space. But as a result of globalization, it's maybe not necessarily beneficial for some of those manufacturing processes to continue here because of the logistics in terms of raw materials and maybe shipment, and then you can probably get a cheaper labor source in other areas. So what are we left to do? We've educated our population so that we can have a highly skilled workforce, so that we can go after services which are the main domain of the international business sector. But yet, whenever we try to go a little further and become compliant, another change comes about, that something else that you have to put in place. And as the leader of government business said, in the past, it has put a lot of burden on companies and the government in Barbados in terms of maintaining those regulations and the pace at which we can enforce and carry out those regulations, not just for the government of itself, through the international business sector. Now, a lot of the burden is going on to the Barbados Revenue Authority through the new arrangements, but you have to put clerical officers there to deal with that. You have to have the computer programs that you can analyze all of that information in a timely basis. You have to have persons with the technical knowledge, lawyers trained in taxation, accountants with similar training so that you can have the appropriate red flags when reports are submitted. All of these things come at a cost to the country and a cost to lower jurisdiction. So whereas it may come with some ease for larger countries in Europe and North America and other parts of the world to actually have these things in place, because in most circumstances there, local businesses generate the level of revenue and the intricacy that, in order for them to function and to be regulated locally, you need to have these things in place. For smaller jurisdictions such as Barbados and other CARICOM countries who try to get into this domain, we don't benefit like Cayman Islands of being able to have the backing of the UK or Bermuda, which also has the backing of the UK and their legislation to support them in what they're doing, because we are sovereign countries. So we have to, based on our $14 billion economy, we have to compete as though we were an economy earning over $1 trillion a year, and have all of the sophisticated offices that can facilitate these regulations. Yes, we do have lawyers who are quite capable of it, and we do have accountants, but do we have the software? Do we have the infrastructure within our government agencies? And those are the things that we've had to put in place, Mr. President, in order to compete, be able to compete and to take our hands out of the lion's mouth, more or less, so that we can continue to earn our way. And we are only asking for a small fraction, a minuscule less than 1%. But look at the hoops and the ropes that you have to go through in order to get it. Is this fair, Mr. President? But you know what? We cannot change it, but I am hoping that at some point in time that we would recognize, not here in Barbados, but globally, that the more pressure that you put on small island developing states in order to legitimately earn revenue, that you have to reciprocate on the other end at some point in time. You can't burn us both ways. You can't put pressure on small island developing states to earn revenue legitimately and to create employment for their people legitimately, and then at the other hand, you try to withhold concessionary loans, and you try to make it seem as though things like climate change does not exist or does not matter, and that we are not vulnerable to those things. Because we recognize we cannot put all our eggs in the tourism basket, because overnight it could be gone. And our people still have to live, they still have to eat, and they still have to work, and they still have to earn a living. And if we are just going after a single, not even 1%, but 0.1% of the revenue which you have at your disposal, why make it put so much burden on us? But work with us till we can get to that stage. And we do it in good faith in most cases. And you know that they will look at jurisdictions such as Barbados and say that we are a tax haven. But then the majority of the issues in their local jurisdiction, when they talk about it, is that they refuse to the multi-billion-dollar persons with high capital, that they refuse to impose the appropriate taxes on them in their own jurisdiction. So that the political argument in most of these places is how much taxes these persons who have a mounted wealth of billions of dollars get away with, and that the majority of the tax burden in their country is usually on the lower income and the middle income persons who earn less than that, in terms of like basically making $100,000 a year to make ends meet. But they refuse to tax the ones in their jurisdiction who have billions of dollars in assets and earn possibly the same $492 million that we earn in one financial year. Some of them may earn in a month, but they refuse to put the taxes on them. But they look to small jurisdictions such as Barbados with less than 1% of that and call us tax havens. So, but Mr. President, this sector is important to us. It has been good to Barbados over the years, and it can continue to be good to Barbados, and a good opportunity for employment for our young people who are qualified in accounting, ACCA, and CGA, our lawyers, who given them great opportunities to practice corporate law, taxation, all of those things. And then not only that, but to the persons in the culinary industries as well, who find jobs and employment, working with in the residences of some of these international business players. So we need to do whatever we can to make it work for Barbados and continue to earn. It is unfortunate that every time small jurisdictions such as ourselves try to better ourselves, the larger pillars in international jurisdictions try to knock us down and to keep us down, not recognizing that there was a period of time where they raped these jurisdictions, and these jurisdictions practically built up the wealth in their countries, which they are living off of now, from the sugar cane to the tobacco to cotton, all of those industries. And we come from here, come from our soils, come from our grounds, but we do not necessarily have not benefited in the way that they have in terms of creating the global commercial empires and making billions of dollars off of those assets. No, we want our opportunity to earn too. We have to take care of our people because we notice that you are not giving us that opportunity. You're not offering the concessionary loans. You are basically not supporting us in our efforts to make our country resilient in terms of climate change. We need our opportunities to earn as well. We will do what we have to do to become compliant because we have always been law-abiding people. And we will do what we have to do, but recognize that it is not as easy for us to do it as it is for you to put those administrative processes in place. For you, you may be able to, for a larger jurisdiction, it may be able to be done in a short period of time. But for us, it may take a couple of years to actually get it in place and to get it functioning in the correct way. So, Mr. President, the importance of this is that we need to grow our international business sector. It has gone through a number of challenges over the years, not homegrown, but because we are trying to respond to the international challenges because larger jurisdictions have been trying to even take away that little 1% or 0.1% that we have been utilizing here. We need to continue to do what is necessary to make it work in this country, Mr. President. With those few words, I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Laura. Senator Kevin Hines. Senator Kevin Boyce.
Maybe that's a sign of maybe you're being prescient. Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good afternoon, 12:26. Sir, the debate which we engage in, again, is one which has occupied the attention of both houses of this parliament several times since 2018. The government tries its best to keep up with global economic trends. We see that worldwide, there's a push for flat tax. So everyone is saying that 15% is the tax which corporations ought to pay, no matter where they are. And if you are in a jurisdiction and the corporation is paying less than that 15%, well, we're going to make you top up the taxes. Simple. Money moves, persons always try to stay ahead of the curve. We will not point out the hypocrisy that certain nation states which mandate these tax levels have within their confines created on little areas where there's even less tax. But we don't get into the hypocrisy and how what's good for the goose is not necessarily good for the gander. What is important is the government attempting to create a niche area in relation to shipping, insurance, and IP. It makes sense, and we wish them all the best in the efforts with regard to the heightened economic substance scrutiny. So what we see is an attempt to play within the rules which are constantly changing. We have had previous debates about economic substance already and recognize within those debates, and we use the familiar refrain that the goalpost keeps on moving. Something has to be done, and I believe the government is doing what it needs to do. And we continue to give the government kudos for its economic policy. I listened with interest, and I'm going to bring it in line with the debate to the statements made in the other place with regard to the excess which the government has achieved in certain of its taxation efforts. And why that is important is that in recognizing that policy therefore shapes certain results, and while we recognize that the efforts at an international policy bears fruit within a very dynamic landscape, the question continues, as a result of that international policy and adjustments that we are making, as the leader of government business says, we're talking about companies who made in excess of 750 million and all this type of money. How does this therefore impact to the benefit of regular Barbadian citizens? The concept is, of course, that we get revenue from these entities, and that therefore goes to the government, who is therefore put in a position to provide services for all and sundry, which we recognize that we benefit from. Free healthcare, free education, and the list goes on. But we know that these things come at a price. Government either makes money to provide these services by taxation or by borrowing, two sources of revenue, sir. So that, sir, is the overarching reality in which the government is operating. You have to play by these changing rules, and you have to do what is necessary to allow your local economy to seek to benefit from the structure that you're putting in place. So we understand what is being done. Global perspective, local implementation. With regard to the specifics of the bill, I can say that specifically the transitional provisions, while seemingly adequate in the past, and I have to be careful because they are subject to ongoing legal matters, led to various forms of interpretation as to what it means for benefits up to period X. The question of what is a fiscal period is often argued by lawyers and, as you would know, sir, as accountants. And for the purpose of income tax, there has been a concern with regard to the transitional provisions which govern the end of the benefits and the start of a new regime. So I urge the policymakers to be very careful when they look at these issues, when you're ending one regime to implement another. Essentially, where a company is going from one regime to the other, the transitional provisions are very important. In that regard, the proposed section 3(1)(a)(2) is something I would suggest be looked at when the necessary parliamentary review personnel are given the instructions. The second area I would like to point out, sir, is that under our income tax, the Division X, the assessment period is 21 days. And one of my partners pointed out to me that in Canada, who we follow for our legislation, the period is 90 days. So why is this so important? The assessment period is when you get your notice from the BRA saying your tax is $2 billion. You therefore have 21 days within which to say, well, hey fellas, this assessment that you gave me, I believe is incorrect for these reasons. In the countries that are mandating the guidelines, in the countries whose legislation they follow, they're given 90 days for this process. And what we have found is that the 21-day period is too sharp or too shallow to allow persons to give their necessary instructions to the professionals to adequately put forward their opposition. So that is something that I would suggest is a Division X in the Income Tax Act, which we are amended by this piece of legislation, that the relevant technocrats take a look at. Having dealt with it generally, and having dealt with as the leader of government businesses, having collided with the bill specifically, I would like to throw out three challenges to the government. Three challenges for the government, because I think this government responds, and I think that it will provide an opportunity to show how we address this active citizenry. So the first one, the current AML KYC regime, which exists on professionals, are burdensome. You actually have clients complaining of AML KYC fatigue in the amount of forms that they have to be sent to be retained. Know your client, let me see your bank account, let me get a referral from your business in your jurisdiction, let me get your assets, your shareholdings. It becomes a lot. And the question is there any way that the levels, the same way we creating certain levels for economic substance if you earn more than X amount of million, can we look at that as well for the AML KYC process? I believe even Senator Malalu has to deal with it from his business, which is real estate. Now, we understand if a chap walks in, we don't want it to be like the olden days where a gentleman turns up with a briefcase. We're not saying to go back to that, but we're saying the level of scrutiny that is currently required is somewhat burdensome, and it therefore then creates a cost. And what do businesses do with costs? They pass them on. So the question is there a way, like how we have created this strata for economic substance, that we can do it for AML and KYC requirements? That's challenge number one, sir. Indeed, I understand that even the same businesses which deal with rentals of vehicles under the BRA regime now have to fill out a tremendous amount of information for the source of funds that are coming in for persons renting a car. This type of administrative level creates more work, which then creates a burden, which then makes things less efficient, and the tourists may not wish to go through all of that. So the question is, are we painting with too fine a brush for some of the requirements as we seek to keep ourselves within a necessary strata? My view is that a lot of times, and I've dealt with it in other areas, you find yourself incorporating what you call best practices, which may not necessarily suit your needs. So my challenge to the government is, how can we strip away some of these administrative burdens while still, so I'm not saying let it be a free-for-all, let's be clear. What I'm saying is you're subjecting regular business persons, regular professionals to a level of scrutiny that perhaps is too burdensome and is better suited for more sophisticated operators. That's number one. Number two, and this is specifically for my government, Senator Minister Reid, in relation to the synergies, I think I like that word, the synergy which currently exists between TAMIS and the BRA in relation to corporations. So, Mr. President, as it currently stands, we know a corporation has to file its annual returns, and then it files its corporate income tax with TAMIS. We know that TAMIS is online only, and we know that the corporate returns which have to be filed, I saw the ads in the paper and I thought it was very good, and they have an open day clinic. So what I would like to throw out now to the government is, how can we get TAMIS and the new Business Barbados to create one portal where you go in as a small businessman and say, hey, this is my taxes, this is what I've earned, here is evidence of my company, one form, one file, everything is done. I think that would be a wonderful challenge, and I look forward to if it is taken up to business efficiencies. The third one, Mr. President, is based on an article that was published this week by Dr. Anki Scott Joseph, who I've had interactions with in a professional setting, and she's someone who comes across extremely thorough. And sir, what was indicated was that the effective tax rate of a professional or any person who earns $75,000 is now 32.8%. This is under the Income Tax Act, in case there's any query as to why we're having this discussion. The issue is, sir, that if someone earns $200,000, they're paying a tax rate of 32.5%. So you're actually paying less tax, 0.3%, if you earn 200K than if you earn 75K. And it's something which, a point which we have made before, and which I have certainly made, in that we need to look at our tax structure in that those who can afford to pay more, and that this middle class, especially the young professionals, if something can be done to reduce the burden, because we cannot say fair is fair, and we have a situation where at $75,000, your effective tax rate is 32.8, and at $200,000, your effective tax rate is 32.5. So that's number 3. And I look forward to hearing the debate at the budget time with regard to how they will deal with the levels, because it can be done, especially in light of the statements made in the other place with the excess that has been gained from the current tax structure. Mr. President, those are my contributions, and I am in support of this proposed legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Kevin Boyce. Any more speakers? Senator Maladou.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to make a couple of comments, and I will apologize for my voice. I came in from a flight of, I think, 32 hours last night, but I wanted to be here. First of all, sir, this legislation is completely in alignment with what government said they were going to do, and it is welcomed that the vast majority of local companies who are paying a 9% tax rate will no longer be subject to the economic substance tests, which really just created a bunch of paperwork and achieved nothing. So I'm extremely thankful for that. I will say that on the update, what we need, though, for those 3 areas where the you have the shipping companies, the insurance companies, the IP companies, the BRA should work very quickly to publish the guidelines on how that is going to be interpreted. The economic substance rules for them is going to be interpreted. That needs to be done post-haste because we cannot afford to lose any more of those companies, because during the last few months or maybe years, while there was grave uncertainty around this, and many people have spoken about the changes coming from other places that we can't be responsible for, we have lost a significant number of those companies already, and we do not wish to lose any more. So we need certainty. Businesses need certainty. And the regulations surrounding how you will interpret economic substance in those 3 areas is extremely important. With that said, I would be very interested if Senator Cummings had or would have at some point in the future to give us some statistics on how we are doing with these overseas companies. How many do we have? How many have we lost? What is the taxation that we're gaining from them? There is previous data, but with the change in the legislation now and all companies are considered local companies, it's hard to really figure out what's there. Couple other points, and then I would like to pick up on something Senator Boyce has said. Sir, the legislation that we're dealing with today addresses the past. It does not address the future. And the reality is that we need to stop complaining about who moved my cheese, because that's really what this is about. And we need to start looking at how do we craft a future international business regime for us? What can we do? And there has been a lot of talk, and I know the government had a consultant, and there was a lot of discussion about mutual funds and the blue-green economy, and we were going to attract these mutual funds here. And I'm curious as to what progress we have made with that. And I'm asking us just to stay ahead, not to react to what these other countries are doing to take our cheese away from us, but perhaps we can look other places to find new cheese. 2 last comments, sir, and I won't take up a lot of your time, but Senator Boyce has triggered me to make a couple of comments on KYC and AML, and I want to endorse what he said absolutely, completely. And since he did mention the area of business that I often practice in, which is in real estate, I would like to make these comments about it. The KYC and AML regulations that are placed upon real estate agents in Barbados is completely unreasonable. Real estate agents do not handle client funds. It never passes through them, but the level of KYC and AML that they have to do, all it does is slow down business. It achieves nothing. It is a complete duplication without any added safeguards. Everything that a small real estate agent in Barbados might do for KYC or AML is already being done with much more competent people in the legal profession, who are the ones who are actually touching the money, who are collecting the money and dispersing the money. The real estate agents do not do that. And they get a proportionate fee for what they're doing. Sometimes zero, and sometimes whatever they would like for, it is not a legislated fee. It's a fee that they negotiate in the free market. You're absolutely right. Thank you, Senator Nichols, for pointing that out. There are unintended consequences on the sector. To maintain the KYC and the ML obligations on real estate companies actually creates more risks, because some of these companies are very small. And when you ask them to collect this level of data, there becomes issues surrounding the security of that data. So I would like to endorse what Senator Boyce has said and have some form of threshold that is appropriate, just as this legislation is. And lastly, sir, my comments on taxation in general, and I've said this before a number of times, and unfortunately I'm going to have to say it again. I do hope at some point in time we would look at our overall tax regime in Barbados. Again, Senator Boyce, sorry to have to call on you, but you did point out the percentages, which I don't know them, but it does seem disproportional that a company can pay 9% tax, but the individuals who work in there may be paying 32.8 or 32.9 or 32.5%. And those who own businesses are therefore able to structure around that. Those who are purely employees pay the higher tax rate. So I actually believe that, and as I have suggested here before, is that we may want to completely abandon the idea of taxing people on what they earn and purely look at taxing people upon what they spend. That is the way that other jurisdictions have approached it. And I think it is one that makes sense. If you want to spend a lot of money, you pay a lot of tax. If you want to save your money, you can save your money as well without tax. And we have a tax system today, sir, that is fundamentally, or a business environment that is fundamentally a frustrating one. And we have to spend lots of time and come in here and talk about how do we facilitate so as to avoid the frustration. And then we talk about an uncompetitive environment where we have to provide concessions. So when I do hope in supporting this legislation, that at some point in time we can look at the overall income tax legislation and look to align it better with what our national interests are to grow this economy, being firm craftsmen of our fate and not relying on other countries for them to tell us what we can and cannot do. Let us look to what we would like to do and craft legislation that suits that. But as I said at the outset, sir, I support this legislation, and I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Malado. Member Speakers, Senator Cummings. Sorry, Senator the Honourable Linda Durst.
Why do you do that?
Thank you, Mr. President. I have been in this honorable Senate since, I think, sometime in 2018. And over that 7-year period, quite a number of bits of taxation legislation have come before us, not because we wanted to amend the tax, but because some person or persons in the international community mandated or insisted that we comply with the rules and guidelines that they had developed. And I disagree with a lot of what we were required to do, but I understood the reason why we had to do it. I understood that if we didn't make the various amendments, we would end up being blacklisted. We have invested a lot of money and effort and time in ensuring that we, meaning Barbados, comply with the requirements under the OECD and the EU. And I disagreed with a lot of what we were required to do, but I understood why we had to do it. We've reached the stage just earlier this year where we were removed from I think it was the watch list or the, yes. And we obviously don't want to get back to that situation again, and therefore this is another piece of the puzzle, if you were, that we have to put in place in order to keep our jurisdiction from being referred to or considered as a harmful tax jurisdiction. But there's something about this particular one which I don't have a lot of objections to, because I understand it. And more, we have got to be able to see that whatever we do must be transparent, must be fair, and that the international community is going to be continuing to put that pressure on us to keep our jurisdiction clean. The point is this, that when we look at this whole question of economic substance, the OECD's position, of course, is that economic activities should really be aligned with where you create your value. That is to say, if you are generating your revenues in a particular jurisdiction, then the bulk of your taxation you should be paying tax in that jurisdiction, and not being made and not creating what is essentially sometimes referred to as, like, for example, shell companies, which effectively are set up here and for no other reason than to be able to benefit from the low tax regimes in Barbados and some of the other international offshore jurisdictions. I don't know how we have fared in terms of our international business sector over the last few years. It would have been interesting to see how many companies are still registered, if the sector is growing, if a number of companies have left, so that we get some idea of what the impact of these legislations and so on, which we have had to put in place to satisfy OECD requirements, what effect it has really been having on the sector in Barbados. And that is important to have that kind of information, because in the 90s, in the 80s, the 90s, particularly when the offshore sector was really growing, the number of persons employed in the sector was pretty significant. A lot of accountants found work in the sector. And as a matter of fact, there were times that it began to put pressure on some of the local accounting firms to find, staff to be able to perform their functions. It provided a significant amount of taxation revenues for the government. So the question is, we need to be able to look and to see how we have been affected because of having to put in place all of these new legislative requirements and regulations as mandated by the OECD. So the key aspects of the OECD position really are to combat harmful tax practices. There, you have companies claiming tax residence in, as I said before, in no or nominal tax jurisdictions without having a genuine economic presence. And there are some, there are not a lot of activities, fortunately, this time around, which will be affected or which will affect sort of our local, what I would call our local business community. They're not things that are going to affect our local business activities. The things that they're looking at are insurance, for example, international financing, banking activities, for example, and leasing. So these are the type of things which we are not highly involved in, and that's so they shouldn't affect or a burden or a problem for our local business community per se. It will, of course, require significant resources in the Revenue Authority to be able to regulate and to police all of this, because, and I noticed that we have an implementation of this effectively comes into place from the 1st of January 2025. So effectively, this is something that the tax or revenue authorities will have to become efficient in terms of making sure the proper regulations are in place, in terms of being able to audit these international business companies to see that they are in fact complying with this economic substance requirements. So what are we going to be looking for? And we know things like, we've heard about things like mine and management, for example, where the companies will have to demonstrate that they are being managed, these international business companies will have to demonstrate that they are being managed here in Barbados. We will have to show that there's adequate levels of staffing, that the expenditures are commensurate with the level of revenues which are being generated and being reported in this jurisdiction. And so these are the things that the tax authorities will have to be paying attention to and will have to be able to review and give a clean slate or a clean report to these various international offshore companies. As I said, I think I don't have a lot of objection to this particular bill, because I think that it is important that more and more we move in line with best practices and transparency, and that we can be satisfied that activities, business activity, which is undertaken and which is going on in this jurisdiction is really genuine, is really genuine activity. And this is what basically the economic services legislation is hoping or is set out to achieve. I don't know if we, as a result, we will lose some more of our international business companies. We will, of course, have to wait and see. But I would hope that the sector, even with all of these requirements, will still continue to grow because it is an important economic sector for Barbados. As I said, in terms of employment, in terms of generating tax revenue, in terms of all of the persons who have, non-residents who have come to work here and who have to live in hotels or rents or whatever, who go out to dinner and so on. And therefore, they also input a lot of business into the Barbadian community. And so I hope that we don't lose out on all of that because of having to introduce this legislation. So the overall position is that while multinational enterprises can operate globally, their tax planning must align with actual reality of where their business functions, and where their assets and risks are located. And with those few words, Mr. President, I am pleased.
Thank you very much, Senator Nurse. Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And as is the norm, I want to thank all of the honorable senators who have spoken on this bill, and I'm going to attempt to respond to as many of the queries and comments as I can. Senator Worrell, thank you for your comments. It is always a good day when the government and the opposition can agree on the importance of a measure and be mutually complementary on a single matter. So today is a good day. No wonder we had the rains over the last few days, but today is a good day. But, Mr. President, in responding to the concerns legitimately raised by Senator Worrell and all of those who have spoken about the constantly moving goalposts, the number of times since 2018, we in this chamber who sit here now, who've been here since May of 2018, have had to come to make changes to the global business regime. We know what this feels like. For those who are Barbadians and who have lived in Barbados all this time, or who have followed Barbados all this time, even before we sat in this chamber, changes always had to be made. We always talked about feeling as if the goalposts were being moved and that other jurisdictions were determining what our fate should and should not look like. And in 2023, Mr. President, one Sunday evening, I should say, one of the government's tax advisors, the former OECD Director of Tax Policy, actually, who, once he left the OECD, joined Barbados to make sure that we could legislate now from on the inside outward, that they called and they raised a concern. They said that at the time, Barbados was in danger of not meeting a critical threshold where the global business sector was concerned. It required, Mr. President, around 7 o'clock, during that afternoon, I should say, the Prime Minister called me, and I in turn mobilized the team along with the Barbados Revenue Authority, at the time Revenue Commissioner, and we agreed that we would assemble that Sunday night at 7 p.m. in Baobab Towers. We all went there, a team of contract professionals, the technical teams, and the leadership. And together with the International Business Unit, as it was called then, we gathered and stayed in Baobab Towers in the Global Business Unit until 5:30 the following morning, where we went home, showered, changed and went back. And the team continued to work. And during the course of that night, persons like Senator Boyce, now renamed Senator Hines, but Senator Boyce, got calls from 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning as corporate trust service providers for the purpose of meeting the requirements of the submission of information so that we, in turn, in the IBU, could share that information with the BRA, and the BRA, under their obligations under the treaty with the OECD, could submit their exchange of information submissions and the automatic exchange of information requirements so that where there were companies in Barbados operating, that we could meet those requirements. We know what jumping through hoops looks and feels like. We managed, by doing what I've just described, to avoid Barbados finding itself on any gray or any blacklist because of non-compliance. That is an example, Mr. President, of Barbadians doing what is necessary. And I remember in my engagements during that period with the OECD, saying to them, when we come to meetings, to international meetings in the OECD, there are delegations that have 20, 30 people just at the meeting. But in their offices back at headquarters, they've got hundreds of staff. In Barbados and small island developing countries like ours, we don't have that. We do not have those numbers, but yet we have to meet the requirements in the same way that those large delegations and those large countries and those large organizations with large turnovers, like Senator Worrell said, they have to meet this. We have to meet the same requirements. And we have always argued that it has been disproportionate for small economies. So there's no question that not only has Barbados had to jump through hoops, but the fact that we are off the gray and the black list of the world suggests that we have jumped through those hoops successfully. Mr. President, you on the AML side have also been a part of the process, along with the Office of the Attorney General, in making sure that we successfully were able to announce earlier this year that some changes were made and Barbados was able to be removed from the listings. And that too was a collaborative effort led by the Office of the Attorney General, the Central Bank of Barbados, Business Barbados, the Barbados Revenue Authority, all kinds of agencies being pulled from all kinds of places to jump through the hoops that we all agree have been imposed on us. So we can make no arguments there, Mr. President. Now, Senator Boyce made a couple of comments that I want to attempt to give some answers to. On Sunday, many of you would have seen a full-page ad in the newspaper for Business Barbados. One of the things that I shared on previous occasions was that there is an issue with annual returns. When you know that you have an income tax filing to make under the Income Tax Act for your personal income, you know that there's income tax season. If you have corporation tax, you know that there's corporation tax season. But for annual returns, they correlate under the existing legislation to the date on which your company was incorporated. So it means that there is no annual return season universally in the same way that corporation tax and income tax would apply. And so we've made a decision as a ministry, specifically through Business Barbados, to get out of the offices and into the communities to be able to work with those who find themselves in difficulty having not filed annual returns. Because if you have not filed annual returns, what happens is that there's a charge day on day on day, and there's an annual cap that will take you up to a maximum of $3,000 in any given year. But the number of years that those annual returns can remain outstanding can run you into thousands of dollars. And we have seen that happening. And so what we have tried to do in our customer-facing approach of Business Barbados is to have those customer clinics, those community clinics, where we now have begun proactively to engage with the business community. And so that's what Senator Boyce is referring to, and that will continue throughout the year so that we are in a position to make sure that proactive, outward-facing customer service becomes the new mantra for Business Barbados. I did say that it's not magic when I brought that piece of legislation into this chamber, establishing Business Barbados effective April 1 earlier this year, that there were 30 years plus, if not more, of old legislation that needed to be reviewed and needed to be reformed, and I could not just snap my fingers and it would all go away, but it would be a process, and the publication of that annual returns clinic in the Sunday Sun, as it will continue to be, is a part of those interventions to make sure we are making business easier for people in this country. Equally, Mr. President, the Companies Act. The Companies Act is an old piece of legislation that has been amended more times than I can count or any of us can count. And so we have undertaken to begin a complete legislative overview of the Companies Act to bring it into compliance with a modern era. Senator Boyce mentioned Canada. We actually are looking at the Canadian model because that is one of the best practices, but we are also equally looking at other jurisdictions to make certain that we have a brand new Companies Act that correlates to where Barbados is in 2025, 2026, and where we intend to go. Now, Senator Boyce also raised questions about the readiness, as did Senator Lindell Nurse, the readiness of the Barbados Revenue Authority and the ability to get the arrangements put in place. Senator Malalou also made passing reference to it. These amendments, Mr. President, were elaborated on in tandem with the Barbados Revenue Authority, hand in hand, hand in glove. We worked as the International Business Unit and the Ministry of International Business alongside the Barbados Revenue Authority. There's a question that was asked about a portal. When we were creating Business Barbados and we were making changes to the portal, we undertook to ensure that there were synergies created. And the first entity that we met with to ensure that those synergies were created was with the Barbados Revenue Authority, so that businesses, small and large, could then be able to have a single interface with the government of Barbados when making these submissions, and that work is underway. Specifically to small businesses, that work has actually been completed. So there is a dedicated portal housed by the Barbados Revenue Authority with the endorsement of the Ministry with Responsibility for Business that allows for that single interface. Equally so, Mr. President, on the question of companies that remain within the compliance framework for global business, that also, Mr. President, has been brought into alignment with the Barbados Revenue Authority. There are additional fields that needed to be added into the income tax, the corporate tax submission, and those have already been, that work has already been advanced, and we expect that by the time the business community begins to interface with the system, if they have not done so already, that they will see that not only is the Barbados Revenue Authority not in an advanced state of readiness, but they are completely ready to take these actions moving forward. Now, there was a question raised about how Barbados has fared in this global business sector and how we have treated to the revenues. Now, in the other place, the minister in the Ministry of Finance spoke about the collection of corporation tax. And if I think I remember in 2024, when I came here, we spoke about $470 million odd being collected from the global business sector. Last year, 2023, last year, we saw over $1 billion in revenue being collected under corporation tax, specifically for those companies that are within scope. And you remember what the definition is of within scope. But how has the sector fared in the last year? In my ministry, we have just completed, actually, for submission, an assessment of that question. Where is the sector? How many businesses are registered in the sector? How many were dissolved? How many have left? Where have they left? What have they said on leaving? And I want to just share a few of those statistics here. In 2020, we went as far back as 2020. We had new registrations of limited liability companies, 934. The dissolved companies were 207. So for 237 companies that were dissolved in 2020, 934 were registered. In 2021, 134 companies were dissolved. In 2021, 995 were registered. In 2022, 186 were dissolved and 1,028 were registered. In 2023, 201 companies were dissolved, 1,449 were registered. In 2024, 311 were dissolved and a high of 1,517 were registered. So clearly we can see that there is a consequential difference between the number of new companies being registered in the country vis-a-vis those that are being dissolved. I want to draw attention also to the primary reasons for those companies that have been dissolved and have shifted jurisdiction. 19% of them indicated that the economic substance requirements that we are here repealing were the reason for them shifting jurisdiction. 19% of those companies that shifted. And so we can see, Mr. President, that what we're doing here and what we have agreed that is important for us to do here has a direct impact on Barbados's attractiveness as a domicile for global business. So I'm hopeful that having shared that data with the colleagues, that you are then in a position to use it in your respective spheres of influence. No, I take the points that have been raised by Senator Boyce specific to the transitional arrangements in Section 3.1.2, as well as the interpretation periods, how lawyers versus accountants reconcile that, and I will share that with the Barbados Revenue Authority, as well as a point made by Senator Malalou on the publication of guidance notes with the Barbados Revenue Authority. I have already taken the time to share the query with the new Barbados Revenue Commissioner, Mr. Jason King, and as soon as he provides me with an answer, I commit to giving you that response. So with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill, this is order number 10 we're dealing with, to be clear. This will be read a second time. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting is the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that we go back to public business and to appoint Senator Lindell Nurse as the acting deputy president for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that Senator the Honorable Lindell Nurse be appointed as deputy president for the remainder of today's sitting. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Thanks, the ayes have it. Senator Nurse, thank you for agreeing to be appointed as deputy president of the Senate for the remainder of today's sitting.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Honorable Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Honorable Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that Clause 1 do not stand part.
The question is that Part 1 do now stand. Sorry. Clause 1, sorry, do now stand part. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Clause 2 do not stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 do now stand part. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Clause 3 do not stand part.
The question is that clause 3 do now stand part. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 4 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 4 do now stand part. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill not be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Companies Economic Substance Repeal Act 2025.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Companies Economic Substance Repeal Act of 2025. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Order number 11, sir. The name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate to move the second reading of the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2025.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve it. Mr. President, I beg to move this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill, the Income Tax Amendment, yes, the Income Tax Amendment Act of 2025, be read a second time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Honorable the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Honorable Senate is now in committee.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 1 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 1 do now stand part. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 2 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 2 do now stand part. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 3 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 3 do now stand part. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye?
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor the President the passage of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Deputy President has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I'd like to move that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Income Tax Amendment Act 2025.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Income Tax Amendment Act of 2025. Will those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this sitting of the Senate be suspended for lunch to reconvene at 2:30 p.m.
The question is that, Ms. Romney?
Order number 13, sir. To move the second reading, I beg your pardon. Order number 12, namely order lead the Senate to move the second reading of the final appropriation bill 2022-23. Final appropriation 2022-23 bill 2025. And these bills were certified money bills.
Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Permission to treat two orders number 12, 13, and 14 as a single item.
The question is that we take orders number 12, 13, and 14, which are appropriation bills related to 3 financial years, as a cognate debate. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The next ayes have it. We will therefore treat these items with a cognate debate. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, these are administrative and more regulatory matters than they are substantive. And so, as you know, we on an annual basis pass the estimates of expenditure, the approved estimates of expenditure, but we also have a number of supplementary requests that may come through during the course of the year. These appropriations bills simply reconcile any supplemental resources that were added on to the appropriately approved appropriations, the approved expenditure for each financial year, and these will cover financial years 2022, 2023, 2023 to 2024, and 2024 to 2025. And so, Mr. President, I beg to move that these bills do not pass as money bills.
We're still on item number 12. The question is that this bill, this is a money bill, so there's no going to the committee, but the question is that this bill Order number 12 be read a second time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move this bill do not pass a third time, be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is accordingly read a third time.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill, the final appropriation bill 2022-2023, bill 2025, do now pass and be so cited.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the final appropriation 2022 to 2023 Act 2025. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Leader of the Senate to move the second reading of the final appropriation 2023 to 2024 bill 2025.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is read a second time.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as a final appropriation bill 2023-2024 bill Act 2025.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the final appropriation 2023 to 2024 Act of 2025. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Order number 14, naming the Honorable Leader of the Senate to move the second reading of the final appropriation 2024-25 bill 2025.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye?
Aye.
Those against please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as a final appropriation 2024-2025 Act 2025.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the final appropriation 2024 to 2025 Act 2025. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Mr. President, that brings us to the end of government's business for today, and I beg to move that this sitting of the Senate be adjourned sine die.
The question is that the Honorable Senate do not adjourn sine die. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This Honorable Senate is therefore adjourned sine die.